Welcome to Breaking Doctrine, presented to you by the Combined Arms Doctrine Directorate at the Combined Arms Center at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The views expressed here are those of the individual and do not represent the views of the Combined Arms Center, U.S. Army, or U.S. government.
Welcome to Breaking Doctrine, a U.S. Army Combined Arms Center podcast on emerging doctrine and the Army's vision of warfare. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nate Rice, and this podcast topic is Command Assessment, focusing on ADP 6-22, Army Leadership and the Profession. We are joined today by Mr. Bob O'Brien and Colonel Andy Morgado, members of the Command Assessment Program team. I'm also joined by Lieutenant Colonel Mike Skuza, who attended BCAP 26 this past November, and who will share his experience and thoughts. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Looking forward to the opportunity. Thanks.
Mr. O'Brien, you served as the director of CAP while you were still in uniform, and now you serve as the highly qualified expert advisor to the Command Assessment Program. Can you talk about the history of command selection prior to CAP and why the Army decided to shift to the new process?
In 2019, I got an invitation to come into the Army Talent Management Task Force, and in January of that year, we got asked a question by then Vice Chief of Staff of the Army, General McConville. Is there a better way to select battalion commanders? He was a bit concerned about that, and really making a very quick decision about somebody and their future career and their future contributions to the Army using a very limited amount of information. At that time, what happened is a board met and considered an officer for battalion command, brigade command, or an NCO for battalion or brigade CSM for about 2 minutes per individual. Like any individual board member would spend about 2 minutes, usually less, to make a really important decision on behalf of the individual for that for the future of the Army. And there really wasn't a whole lot of data, and there was very little objective data. Certainly, that was part of that. It was a review of evaluations. And there were a whole lot of heuristics, and you literally had a shop foreman that was tapping his or her watch, telling the board members whether they were on pace or off pace, and whether they needed to speed up or slow down. To answer General McConville's question in 2019 on is there a better way to select battalion, several of us came together and we whiteboarded a concept that became BCAP, and we handed that off to a team led by Colonel Don Fagnan, who built out the details of the Battalion Commander Assessment Program. And what we were envisioning and what eventually got developed was expanding that 2-minute look at an individual's past performance into 17 and a half contact hours, where we have the opportunity to objectively assess candidates and provide a really solid data picture about their knowledge, their skills, their behaviors, and really focusing on the behaviors. And as we combined the systems of the past performance through that board that looked at evaluations, we could see knowledge and skills developing in there, and we could see the behaviors through what became the Command Assessment Program, combine all of that into something that gave us a really solid picture of the individual candidates from many different perspectives. So the science and the art of CAP has remained largely the same over the last 5 years that we've been in operation. Where we've really spent a lot of time with modifications or enhancements to the program is in the feedback loop. And there was a lot of resistance, and potentially rightly so, in the early iterations of CAP. It was a change in culture. It was upsetting a system or changing a system that had selected leaders over many generations to do some really hard jobs in the Army. Senior leaders in the Army had been selected through that system. So changing that system, especially when we were using a data-driven approach with an organization, the Army, that is not well known for significant education in data science and a deep understanding of data, that was a shock to the system. We also, at General McConville's request, when he became the Chief of Staff of the Army, we went full bore into CAP and instituted it with a large population in January 2020 with the first iteration of BCAP, and that reordered an order of merit list that had already been built from the Centralized Selection List board. So at the time, we were looking at data-driven approaches to helping understand people better and to producing a better set of candidates to be battalion commanders. What I think the Army saw at that time was, hey, we're changing the way we're doing this, and these people have already been selected, and now some of these folks have been disqualified or found not yet certified for command and told, hey, you've got to come back and try again in some cases. And in other cases, people moved around the order of merit list, and we were not very forthcoming with the information and with the data and it describing why that happened. We notified people if they were not yet certified, but we did that through the chain of command, and we didn't provide the chain of command the tools to really have effective conversations on why people were not yet certified for command. So about 3 years ago, we started really investing heavily in the feedback mechanism, and we've developed a very solid program to at least make sure people understand if they are found not yet certified, or have the opportunity to understand why they may be not yet certified. We've also invested in dialogue with the chain of command to help them understand why people may be found not yet certified for command, or why they may be moving around in order of merit list. And we dialogue individually with candidates now. We dialogue with the chain of command. In fact, just last night I got an email from a division commander that said, hey, I was expecting an individual to come out on the principal list that's going to get published tomorrow, the 16th of January, and this individual that I saw came out on the pre-po list as an alternate, and I'd like to know why. So I entered into a discussion this morning when I woke up with this division commander and explained, well, this is what happened. And it happened to be in a branch that was very, very competitive, and the grouping, that's the shot group around the principal and alternate cut line in the order of merit list, is a very tight, very densely packed with candidates. And, a 1 point score difference in an order of merit score can make the difference on whether someone is a principal or an alternate, right? And once I explained that to the division commander, the conversation changed to, thank you, I understand. That was not an early conversation that we were having in the first couple of years of BCAP. And I think that has really helped us kind of turn the corner towards better acceptance across the Army.
If I could ask a follow-up question about that first year, you mentioned that the OML that was already existing had experienced a little bit of reordering once the first BCAP went through. Yeah. Was the amount of reordering that you saw what you expected, or was it something that was a little surprising to you?
Yeah, the amount of reordering was pretty surprising. And we saw the reordering in the first pilot that we did in the summer of 2019. And then when we executed in the January of 2020 with the first PCAP, we saw the same type of results. About a third of the people moved around between what became the principal and alternate list. Also, to address the culture of that the culture change of reordering that list, really that there is only one order of merit list now. As people move through the system, right, they get invited, and there is an order of merit to that invitation, and we move down that order of merit to the invitation. There are opportunities for candidates to get nominated to walk on if they don't make the invitation list, and that's been a very successful part of our program over the last couple of years. But There is not an order of merit list on the front end of the CSL, the Centralized Selection List system, or anymore. No order of merit list exists until the entire program or the entire system is complete, and we take the single order of merit list to the Chief of Staff of the Army for approval.
Colonel Morgado, you spent October and November as the Deputy Chief of Staff for CAP. What were some of the notable observations that you had made?
Well, first, I would have to say it was my second year at CAP. I had the opportunity to serve as a panel moderator last year, and in that capacity was a very limited slice or window into a very significant portion of moderating the Army Comprehensive Talent Interview portion of it. So this year, I guess the biggest change was to see the entirety of the operation and really come to appreciate the amount of effort and complexity of that effort. It just may be a 4-day plus experience for the candidate, but it takes probably hundreds of days, and multiply that by several thousand in terms of man hours to pull it off in terms of the people involved every year. The motto of CAP is world class, fair, and consistent, and I say that I saw visible evidence of all those three things on a daily basis of maintaining the integrity of the process, which is important for many different reasons. Certainly, we talked about transparency, or Mr. OB talked about transparency, which is important, but there's certain things that can't be transparent in terms of, because we have to protect the process, because we're not only going to run CAP this year, we're going to run it next year as well. So it has to be that unique experience for each candidate that arrives. So it takes an awful lot of effort, a lot of work to do that. And I certainly appreciate the work that goes into it to make it a truly meaningful system, not only for what it gives back to the Army, but what it provides to the candidate. Because I think the candidate, based on this new emphasis on feedback, which I think is fantastic, it's going to take stuff home with them and make them a better person and a better officer at the end of it. And it takes an awful lot of hard work in order to do that.
Mike, you had mentioned to me earlier today that when you came into the program and you saw how CAP was run, you were very happy with how it was run and you felt it was very transparent. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So to Mr. O'Brien's first comments about what I thought of when I left CGC in 19, where the first pilots and the rumors and the inklings were coming out was, and about the next couple of years where you had that second iteration with a little bit more NDAs and it's the chaos of a new process. My initial thoughts were, hey, this is like SFAS. This is unknown events, no transparency, and it's causing chaos, perceived chaos. That was not what I received when I went through this past fall. The only pressure that I perceived from feeling like there's going to be a cut was on myself. It was self-pressure, self-perceived. Everyone there was fair. The entire staff at each event that we went to, day by day, you were set up for success. You were given, there's an entire team dedicated to communicating to you every single day, every single event, making sure sending you pins that are applicable to today's, unlink or unleave behind device of phones, that they give you every tool to be successful and on time. Even to the point where at the ACFT, the dreaded ACFT of you haven't had one in a while, where you're going to lose a lot of points or, get failed out of. Every instructor at every event within that ACFT was there to see you succeed. So I agree. I think my experience at CAP 26 in cohort 9 that I went to, everyone was fair. Everyone was there to see me succeed. No one was there to cut me. It was not like SFAS, like my original kind of impression before going into it for the first couple of years. So, and that's what I thought. And I saw that throughout the process.
I appreciate that comment, Mike, because the methodology for the command assessment program is not the same as you would see in a special operations assessment and selection program, right? We're entering every candidate into the system with the assumption that he or she is certified for command or ready to take command at that time. And in a small number of cases, we find that there may be some people who have some developmental needs, and we offer opportunities for them to take advantage of some of our programs that can help them be successful. They may have to take a year delay, or in some cases 2 years delay. We've seen that happen, a number of times. And those people who who end up in the not yet certified range and take those developmental opportunities seriously can come out very well off in the end. We've got well over 70% across all of our programs of the people who have been previously not yet certified come back. If they come back, they get certified in a subsequent trip. And a number of those folks earn a spot that's rather high on the order of merit list. We've got serving brigade and battalion commanders in position now that are doing quite well, having gone through that developmental journey. And in some cases, I've conversed with them directly to understand their journeys. And in most of those cases, while it was hard for them to face reality and face the facts that, there were some challenges they may have, they appreciate the opportunity that they weren't just qualified for having to take a bit of self-development or do a little bit of self-development and come back and recompete.
Mike, I also was glad to hear what you said. I don't know if I was the senior leader that gave you your in-brief when you arrived at CAP, but one of the key messages that I'm asked to convey on the behalf of Mr. O'Brien is that the cadre is there to see them succeed or to see candidates succeed. Everyone's got the opportunity to leave with a max score. So our job is to help you do that while enforcing the standard. And I know as a deputy chief of staff, I would frequently have to be the deliverer of bad news, though not the worst news. That's what Mr. O'Brien does. I do a different level of it. But the one thing I could always rely on when engaging a candidate, how was the process? Relate to me what you experienced. And, to a near 100% was, it was fair. They'll give me many other reasons and other challenges that they experienced, but they'll never go back and say, well, the deck was stacked against me. I've never gotten that. So it's encouraging to hear you say that was your experience as a candidate.
Can I ask you a tough question?
Absolutely.
So from a candidate's perspective, right, we're a learning organization. From a candidate's perspective, what would you like to see us do better in the future to allow opportunities for future candidates, future cohorts?
So to directly answer your question is maybe a little bit more communication, if you're not already doing it, to senior leaders and sitting senior leaders to, hey, Major, Lieutenant Colonel promotable, here's what you need to be thinking about. Like, BCAP looks like this. Here are the things that we see. We see these trends of flaws of leaders going into that aren't being successful. Or, hey, here's some things that, because I know you pretty well and I know the flaws and things yourself, here's what I think you need to work on. There was a big hesitancy from 05s coming in to even talk about it. 06 is not the problem. And then the last 2 years since I left at my previous duty station, more open. The 06s were more open to talk about, here was my experience. Here are some things you can do to self-study and improve upon for yourself. Here's where, like, hey, your writing is not that great. You probably should look at how you write. And things like that. Hey, talk to people and your peers and kind of get a gauge on, have an honest conversation. So just communicating that, like, as that's an allowable mentorship moment in the force now as majors are finishing up KD and preparing for the BCAP. That'd be about probably the best thing to make that more widely known that, hey, look, it's not a secret anymore. Like, you can only do so much to prepare for BCAP because no matter what you're going to do, like psychometrics or psychometrics, the PT test, ACFT's got universal standards. You can't really prepare and cheat the system necessarily.
So we do publish a candidate preparation guide every year. It adjusts. I assume you had some interaction with that one. So I'd encourage future candidates to keep an eye on that as we publish that in future years. With the command list that's coming out tomorrow, we are going to also publish a trends document, which is a new thing for us. I'll tell you, if the number one trend or the number one secret to success at CAP and for being a commander or a CSM is look at Army Doctrine, ADP 6-22, and specifically the Army Leadership Requirements Model. If you're leading in accordance with the way our Army Doctrine expects you to lead or outlines you should be leading, you're probably going to be doing just fine at CAP, and you're going to be doing great in your command or your CSL positions. Back to the trends document a little bit, 3 things we're identifying as significant trends for people that are having challenges both at CAP and people who are having challenges when they go into their commander CSL positions. We've done a study about all of the commanders that have been relieved over the last few years, and 77% of the commanders who have been relieved over the last few years have three significant factors in common. They tend to have a low level of self-awareness, and they tend to have a low level of conscientiousness, which we measure using some of our psychometrics. And the conscientiousness is really broken down into two factors that make up the second and third components of what I'm talking about here. So low discipline and low levels of organization. So low self-awareness, low organization, low discipline. Those are the common factors with people who are having challenges coming through CAP and who are having challenges with being very successful in their command or CSL positions.
I'm glad you brought up ADP 6-22, the Keystone Army document when it comes to Army leadership. It lays out what we expect from Army leaders, right? I attended BCAP not last year, but the year before, and I was really lucky to have been an ROTC instructor for the previous 2.5 years prior to going to BCAP, because I was able to swim in the ADP 6-22 waters the entire time. I know most of the ALRM by heart at this point. Now that it's being a more important part of our command assessment is being recognized through the assessment program. As Mike and I were talking about earlier, we're seeing that filter down through the counseling process, through the mentorship process, and it's becoming something that's more inherent to the leadership portion of mentoring, coaching, teaching, and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really happy to see that ADP 6-22 is taking off from that perspective. And honestly, I think CAP has a very big part of that.
So as we were getting close, finish up my brigade 3 year, and talking through with my DCO and the brigade commanders, and in my previous assignment with the other people who have gone through BCAP or CCAP as we do initial counselings and OER outbriefs, as time went on from about, I want to say that 2022 to the previous summer, it got more and more and more transparent and became more and more aligned with ALRM. So like to the point where my entire last OER outbrief and initial counseling were centered around an ALRM, and it came from a former brigade commander who had already just finished up the CCAP panels before. So speaking from experience on how to, again, like we talked before, mentor leaders to be going to and preparing for BCAP in accordance with what the Army wants them to be.
Yeah, Mike, it's great to hear your comments about, speaking in the language of doctrine, right? Because it confirms a lot of the front end that I experienced certainly as a panel moderator. And then even this year as a DCOS, one of your duties is do whatever needs to get done. And sometimes I have to fill in holes. But really a peek behind the curtain is that when that panel speaks to one another, they're using the rubric with the ALRM, right? So when the sergeant major is the last person to speak within the panel to provide a non-voting member to provide observations, the sergeant major, he or she has to use the rubric in accordance with the ALRM and phrase it in those terms. So it is consistent throughout the entire process. Even OPSYCs will use language for the ALRM in order to communicate with one another to assess the officer. So really, I think it's just reinforcing it from your end, from the panel's end, from CAP's end, about the importance of that leadership doctrine across our Army.
I think it's a really interesting point. Recently, I got an email from a division DCG about what he termed as the hidden secret of the command assessment program. And in general terms, what he thought the hidden secret was listening to candidates interview, looking at the Army Leadership Requirements model rubric that we provide them, thinking about candidates as he's determining, okay, should I vote certified or not yet certified? Should I score, 1 or 7 for verbal communications, and thinking in doctrinal terms about every single candidate up to 8 times a day, over about a 2-week period, so, he's getting scores of repetitions of thinking about candidates in the Army Leadership Requirements model. And I think we're seeing that on a grander scale. Not everyone is vocalizing it the way this one particular DCG has vocalized it, but I think that is a really hidden positive consequence that we're seeing come out of CAP, exactly as you described in your experience.
Yeah, I'd like to take some time to go over the assessments used in the program. There are 3 different types of assessments: the screening, go, no-go types, scoring, which provides an objective score for the panel to see those events, and the informing, which gives an overall context. And I'd like to start with the peer and subordinate feedback, one of the informing events. Many officers see this as core to the overall program, and there's a lot of anxiety about these surveys. Getting capped is a phrase that I've heard more than once. How do surveys fit in the overall assessment?
Yeah, before I answer that directly, I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit to really what is the core of what happens at the command assessment program, right? The very first thing you do on your first full day at CAP is you take a battery of psychometric assessments, right? We're looking at personalities and behaviors. We've got commercial off-the-shelf and Army-owned tests that are measuring people's talents. They're measuring their personality and their behaviors objectively, right? And so we start with that as the framework for everything else that happens at CAP. Branching out from there to other types of assessments, we're looking at different types of job samples or work samples that candidates provide that can confirm or deny, reinforce or debunk what we're seeing in the psychometrics. The peer and subordinate assessments is one such work sample. There's an observed behavior exercise. It's different for colonels than it is for lieutenant colonels and CSMs that are coming through. But observed behavior exercise, whether it be a leader reaction exercise or the strategic leader exercise, those are also work samples. The ACFT is a work sample. The height and weight test is a work sample, right? And so those all of those work samples help us understand the individuals with specific examples that we can really kind of tighten the shot group of what we're seeing in the psychometrics, right? So I heard it very eloquently from an individual panel member in an after-action review that we did after, I think it was CCAP 26 ended this last fall. You know, he was talking about peer and subordinate assessments, and his comment to us was, "Hey, look, these are helpful for us to understand the individuals in some specific instances of where we may see data that converges or data that diverges from what we're seeing in the psychometrics. But the truth of the peer and subordinate assessments, just like, and they're all based on the Army Leadership Requirements Model, right? The truth of the ALRM is that you can be an effective leader, you can be a productive leader, but you don't have to be a jerk about it, right? And the vast majority of the feedback that we are getting from individuals providing feedback on individual candidates through that peer and subordinate mechanism is highly positive, okay? And it is also very common for leaders to have some negative feedback in nearly every case. Only about 12% of the candidates who come through the command assessment program have zero negative feedback in their peer and subordinate assessments, right? And think about it. That's natural. We all as leaders have to make hard calls about prioritization, about how we're going to handle certain situations, and we're never going to satisfy everybody. So if somebody gets a feedback request, whether it be a peer or a subordinate, and you've had to make a hard decision that went against what that particular person thought you should be making, you may get some negative feedback. But all the leaders who are making a decision when they cast a vote in the Army Comprehensive Talent Interview understand that fact because they've been in the same positions. They've had to make those hard calls, and it sticks out very clearly when there's an isolated incident that is causing a bit of negative feedback in a peer and subordinate report. And you contrast that with somebody who is not leading in accordance with our Army doctrine, with the ALRM, when they are consistently leading counter to our Army doctrine. That sticks out very clearly. Okay? And so Dr. Melissa Wolf over at the Center for Army Leadership likes to use an interesting quote or an interesting quip about the peer and subordinate report. Really, the question is not did the leader have a bad day and respond poorly or negatively in a certain situation. The real question is, does the leader habitually behave that way, and is every day a bad day with that leader? If every day is a bad day with that leader, that sticks out like a sore thumb.
And I've heard the capped myth, which that's exactly what it is. It is a myth. That peer and subordinate feedback, as Mr. O'Brien said, is one component, right? It is one data element that is seen through multiple other lenses. So the key piece of information is that when you go before the Army Comprehensive Talent Interview or the ACTI, the panel sees the results of your entire CAP experience. That's not the only thing in their file when they open it is peer subordinate feedback. So they see it all in terms of psychometrics and PT and your leadership exercise. They see it all, and it is a composite picture. I wasn't aware of the percentage of leaders with no negative comments on it. Certainly, I served as a panel monitor and as a panel member, and I routinely, even our very best leaders, people who just smoked the interview and had an incredible performance, had at least some negative comment in there. But when you look at that comment within the context, okay, we understand that it was a situation where that leader was required to maybe be more directive because that's what the situation demanded it. And oh, by the way, that's part of Army leadership doctrine. Leadership doctrine recommends a range of behaviors where, on one far end, you have to be directive because that's what the mission calls for, but that's normally a temporary and very contextually, situationally dependent. But where we want to operate, where we should operate, is on the other spectrum, right? Where this idea of mission command and how we delegate and get missions done while preserving the organization. It's only when you're stuck in that directive type of leadership style, as Mr. O'Brien mentioned, that's where it's a problem. But I think those things come out when you look at the composite picture, and we're not just looking at what that peer and subordinate feedback says.
There's something else that I think is really relevant to this topic, in that we do an in-person interview for a reason, right? So that the candidate can put some context to their unique set of circumstances, right? So if you get and every candidate gets asked questions about some type of negative things that have happened or lessons that they've learned, and it's really tempting as a candidate to come in and have everything be roses and rainbows as you're telling your stories. But where I see panels, which I watch all day long, where I see them responding really positively to a candidate's personal situation, is when the candidate becomes quite vulnerable and says, hey, look, I had this particular set of circumstances when I was in X job. And there's a myth out there that people who are Brigade S3s or Division G3s are getting quote, capped when they come to the command assessment program for having to make really hard decisions. The data doesn't show us that. We did have in our very first year of CCAP, we had a pretty significant showing amongst former Division G3s who did not get certified in their first year there, but most of them came back and were successful in subsequent iterations, right? But the candidates who who have those negative circumstances that they know are in their past, or even candidates who are found not yet certified once or even twice. If they come into a panel and they're vulnerable and they tell their leadership journey and put context to it, and most importantly, if they talk about these are the lessons that I've learned, truly learned from this, and here's how I've adjusted my behavior and my leadership style, that adds context to the entire conversation. And the panel members appreciate that because they know that things like that are in that candidate's profile, right? The candidates get feedback from a very senior operational psychologist on what we're seeing in the psychometrics. The panel members read the summary report of peer and subordinate assessments, right? They can see and have access to all the data that we gather over the 4 days at CAP. And so questions are formulated. The panel formulates questions to give candidates the opportunity to tell their story. And if the candidates opt not to tell their story, that can become a challenge. And then the panel is left, especially if they're teetering on, a potentially not yet certified decision, the panel is left to kind of assume, well, does this person understand that they've got some leadership challenges or not? And oftentimes in a case like that, they vote, well, maybe there's some more development that this candidate could use from this, and they'll vote not yet certified, right? So the other myth that's out there is that CAP is finding the war fighters, in quotes, not yet certified at very high rates. Okay, we've done quite a bit of analysis on this over the last few months, and the historic certified rate at CAP across all programs is that 88% of the candidates who come to CAP to get certified end up getting certified. About 12%, 12 to 13% or so are getting found not yet certified. We had a slightly higher not yet certified rate this year at CCAP, and we're doing some data analysis to kind of try to figure that out. I think some of that is tied to the fact that 63% of the candidates who came through CCAP this year were in our early iterations of BCAP, where our thresholds for communicating with the panel in terms of psychometric risk, peer and subordinate risk, other assessment risk, were based on assumptions, and we've modified those to be very data-driven over the last 5 years. And so we're seeing a little bit of latency in that CCAP population as that 63% came back. 63% who were certified in BCAP 21 or 22 came back to be certified in CCAP 26.
It sounds like one trend I'm picking up on is that people who are coming and who are honest, people who are coming and who want to develop and want to do their best, are getting information to either do their best or getting through the process and being certified. As we take a look at the ALRM and how it looks at us, it's not a horoscope, right? It's something that can change, that we can develop, and that we can become better leaders tomorrow. As you said, we have 10 to 13% of our candidates who are being found not yet certified for command, but a lot who are coming back. In fact, I believe that there are a couple who are on their 5th try in this past time. Can you expand on the idea of, hey, CCAP and BCAP are helping people improve, and we're getting better leaders out of this?
Yeah, so we do have a detailed study group that is looking at the 5 years of data to see what trends we're really gathering from a data-driven approach. The challenge and why I can't really give you hard numbers to answer that question right now is the entry to exit time frame from when you decide you want to opt in for a CSL position, a command or a CSL staff position, to the time you finish that is about a 4-year window. And we just entered our 5th year. We just conducted our 5th CAP, right? And so now we've got one full cohort of people who have made it all the way through the system. as we look back to the original way that we built CAP with the CSO board up front, then CAP, and then combining the results of that, we could see an entry to exit short-term effect on there, and in that short-term effect, we could measure that the people who came to CAP and got certified and placed into position in that original system were more cognitively capable. They were better communicators in both verbal and written format. They were in better physical shape, and they had less propensity to display counterproductive or ineffective leadership traits. Okay. We can't measure that as objectively in the short term in the current system because we've changed things up and there's no longer a CSO board on the front end that measures, okay, what does past performance look like? All that happens on the back end after CAP has occurred. But again, back to the things I identified a little while ago, high levels of self-awareness, high levels of organization, high levels of discipline. Those are people who are doing really well at CAP, and those are people who are doing really well in command.
Well, I mean, if I could just add on in terms of a tie back to Doctrine, the fact that CAP is redemptive. That's what development is about, according to Army Doctrine. It is redemptive in that development is not linear. The development, sometimes you have to take a couple steps back in your journey as you develop as a professional before you can take a step forward. So clearly in line with that, there was a very powerful movie clip in an outbrief by Lieutenant Colonel Remy, who's a current SAM student, that talked about his personal journey. I think he went to CAP 3 times, if I'm not mistaken, but he cited in this clip of just how he grew and learned as a person over time. And he admitted his stubbornness, which I found pretty interesting within the clip. But, it took a couple of hammer blows to the head before he realized wow, okay, I need to modify some of the things I'm doing, not because it's people just want to make me change. It's because it's going to make me more effective leader, and I just have to have the courage and be open to the feedback so I can become better. It just took him a little bit longer. So that's just part of the process. And when we open up a mirror, to show you parts of your psyche, your leadership approach, your personal approach that you just can't see, you're blind to on a daily basis. And oh, by the way, your chain of command is going to be blind to it as well because it's not routinely tested for. You're going to be surprised about what you see. For the most part, I think most folks would be surprised. And so that's what we're trying to show you, right? It's that reflection so that you can do something about it. And, I'm very grateful that CAP is redemptive because I think it's consistent with Army policy and Army doctrine.
One of the really interesting things about this case that Colonel Morgado talked about, Lieutenant Colonel Remy, one of his feedback loops that he developed through the journey that he went through was from his family, right? And so he went back and talked with his family about, hey, they told me this at CAP, and his family quite bluntly told him, well, we could have told you that, or we have been telling you that. But I think an important point to take out of that is leaders' ability and willingness to develop their own feedback loops and be willing to listen to the hard truth and encourage people to provide the hard truth about how they're leading is a pretty powerful thing. And that gets to the self-awareness. Those leaders that are willing to take feedback, even if it's not something they agree with, and at least think about it and think, well, what could be causing this? It can be a really powerful tool. I just came from a briefing that the Chief of Staff of the Army did with the pre-command course that's in session here, and there was one officer that stood up and asked the chief about how he developed his self-awareness over time. And as the conversation kind of ensued, there were aspects of, how are you getting feedback from your subordinates? How are you getting feedback from your peers? How are you getting truthful, not evaluation quality feedback from your chain of command, but real feedback that can be developmental from your chain of command. How are you incorporating your friends and family into that so you can see yourself from many different perspectives? That can help you build your self-awareness and improve the quality of your leadership.
Yes, sir. So I would like to address a current topic that's tied back to command assessments. Recently, a senior officer was relieved in part due to alleged attempts to interfere with the assessment program. This highlights that trust in the process is important on so many levels. Candidates want to know if the process will be fair to them, and soldiers want to know that their commanders are being selected by merit. What is CAP doing to ensure this balance is being kept and the process can be trusted?
Yeah, so throughout the course of that entire chain of events that occurred, we upheld the standards, and I personally was involved in making sure we upheld those standards. I had my legal advisor right next to me the entire time as we were going through this, making sure that all the decisions were made in accordance with the prescribed authorities, that we notified the proper individuals and what have you. So from a system perspective, all of that has remained intact, and we've paid a little bit more attention to some aspects, but really the core of our SOP for how we handle any anomaly that occurs at the command assessment program. We capture any anomaly in a memorandum for record. So the memorandum for record that leaked to the press that had my name on it regarding that situation, that was something we did as a normal course of events. I didn't write that thing just because that happened, and I wanted to make sure that we captured the events in case something happened. It was an anomaly, so we put it in our record book. Even every day when a candidate, when we have the decision on candidates who are not yet certified, even every one of those candidates' roster numbers go into that record book as, hey, these candidates were found not yet certified for command for these reasons. So if we ever have to go back and reference the facts, we've got it written into our record book. I'll tell you from the Army's perspective, the command assessment program has survived that event and really come out stronger from it. You may be aware, many of you may not be aware, that the Secretary of the Army this week signed an Army directive that established the command assessment program as a permanent part of the Centralized Selection List program, took it out of pilot status, and it is a permanent thing. And over the course of the next 6 months, we are solidifying that in the appropriate officer and enlisted regulations and policy notices to make sure that it's all codified properly. That's going to happen over the next 6 months. The Secretary in that document also established an assessments directorate at Army Human Resources Command. The command assessment program is going to be a capability in the assessments directorate. So one of the things I've been doing over the course of the last few weeks, and will continue for the next few months, is moving around across the Army to look at the system of assessments known as career-long assessments, Athena, that the Center for Army Leadership is responsible for, and helping figure out how can we better operationalize all of the assessments that the Army has to be able to better inform leader development, self-development, unit development, capabilities, and really, the way I'm kind of thinking about this long term is individualized, tailored development on an individual level at scale. Those are the things that are going through our minds, in the command assessment program and what will become the assessments directorate over the next few months.
Everyone who arrives there, panel members to Sergeant E5 medic that's going to be at the ACFT site, take their jobs incredibly seriously. And we spent a lot of time on calibration, and we spent a lot of time on rehearsals, and we spent a lot of time on validation. So before that first candidate ever arrives, those 400 members of this pickup team that form CAP and the cadre of permanent personnel, we are totally committed to the integrity of the process. Even as a panel moderator, facilitating a panel with 5 general officers in there as voting members, they would check my work, right? And I would get challenged to ensure that I was following the procedures that they had been briefed, because they, as general officers, had to uphold the standard of that panel. So it's taken very, very seriously. And, we're all humans. We're all going to, make mistakes at times, but everyone had a backup and ensure we got a definitive answer before anyone left the room or the site that we were doing the absolute right thing and move out. So, like I said, and I think I alluded to it earlier, I'm incredibly impressed by the integrity, the consistency, and the fairness of the process.
So before we sign off, are there any last thoughts you'd like to share?
Even before I attended, as I was forming my initial thoughts of what I thought CAP would be like for me, already knew HRC started publishing those CAP assessment trends. And I saw in there, they got to the point where they were talking about the number of MQs to the number of HQs and who came in. And I think it was the 2022 results where there was an officer that went in with 5 out of 5 was highlighted. Even the trends was the number one officer going into CAP on that initial OML leading into it, came out not certified. That to me was the first indicator, all right, this system works as a filter to about those that are in the rash of several years of the buzzword of toxic leaders. What we look at as counterproductive leadership traits is working. That set the initial tone, and then linked into kind of how I went forward on and how I feel about CAP on the backside of it.
Nate, for my parting shot, I will do a shameless plug. Mr. O'Brien and I had the privilege of working together and penning an article for Military Review, and it came out today that shows the tie of CAP to Army warfighting and leadership doctrine. So I encourage folks to go to Military Review and their online exclusive articles, and you could read about it there.
So my parting advice is if you're at all interested in being a senior leader, whatever role that senior leadership might be at CAP, come to CAP. At a minimum, you're going to learn something about yourself. If you opt out of coming to CAP, or you do not opt in, to be more precise in the terminology, you're limiting your options, and you're limiting an opportunity for the Army to provide some really well-resourced feedback about you. That no matter what you do in the future, whether you opt to be a commander, to be a CSL staff officer, to be a CSM, if that's your path, then great. We'll help you get there. If you're going other directions, inside or outside the Army, you're also going to get that feedback as well, and it can be useful for you to learn. We've got a number of opportunities for people to get in touch with us. We love the dialogue with candidates and panel members and really the whole community of interest with the Command Assessment Program. So if you're looking to learn more about the program, or you're looking for more feedback as a candidate, or you're looking for feedback about your people who've come, if you're in the chain of command for candidates, you're welcome to reach out to us. My personal email address, robert.a.o'brien12.civ@army.mil. You can also reach me at Bob O'Brien 4 on LinkedIn. You can reach the Command Assessment Program on LinkedIn at the U.S. Army Command Assessment Program, and our website is talent.army.mil/cap.
Awesome. So I'd like to thank all my guests for being here today, and thank you for providing your feedback about the CAP program.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's been fun.
Yeah, thanks, Nate.
Thank you.
Just like writing new doctrine is a team effort, breaking doctrine takes a team. Without the crew in the Special Doctrine Division here at CAD, we wouldn't be able to bring you this great show. Please don't forget to subscribe on Google, Apple, or Spotify podcasts, and follow us on social media at U.S. Army Doctrine to get updates on new podcasts, Doctrine Digest videos, and other publications. Finally, the views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the official position of the U.S. Army, the U.S. Army Training and Doctrine Command, or the Combined Arms Center. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Nate Rice, and this has been Breaking Doctrine.